canine foster families. Welcome to Module 3 of the MSPCA's Canine Foster Care Program training. In Module 3, we're going to be discussing dog sociability is a spectrum, advocating for your foster dog, socialization, what it is and what it isn't, and identifying and reporting challenges. As a reminder, we wanted to discuss rules versus recommendations. Rules are going to be highlighted in blue text throughout this training, and these are guidelines that are set in place for all animals in foster care to increase their chances of success in the foster home. Recommendations are everything else within these presentations, and they are a set of standard recommendations that should be followed unless instructed otherwise. These recommendations may be tailored to increase the chances of success in a foster home for your particular foster animal.
Here we're going to talk about dog sociability as a spectrum. All dogs are individuals and they have their own preferences, just like we've discussed in modules 1 and 2. We're using their body language and our interactions with them to identify their likes and their dislikes. And that is also true for how dogs interact with other dogs. Of course, we'll have some evaluation information from their time in the shelter that will help us to inform where they fall on this spectrum of sociability. And we will absolutely share that information with anybody who is on the care team for any of our dogs in the foster program. But it's important to know that we won't likely be able to have a whole picture of how a dog might respond to other dogs in their environment once they're outside of the shelter setting. So it's important that as their foster caregiver, you have an understanding of how this kind of spectrum of sociability works and how we can maintain our foster dog's comfort level with other dogs if it exists, and certainly not exacerbate any challenges that our foster dogs might have when seeing other dogs by exposing them to other dogs or things like that. So when we talk about the kind of spectrum of sociability, there's really a very small number of dogs that are truly dog aggressive, that they just kind of across the board, they really dislike all other dogs. They might have a dog friend at home, but really they're going to go out of their way to either get away from other dogs or make other dogs go away from them. And then the vast majority of the dog population fall into this category that we call dog selective. So they're really selective about what kinds of other dogs they want to interact with. And I don't mean what breeds or ages, though age can certainly be a factor, but rather what behavior or temperament the other dog might have that they feel comfortable with. So some dogs might really prefer not to be around excited adolescent dogs. They might prefer gentler play. Other dogs might just have a few close friends, dogs that they've known for a while and were appropriately introduced to, but they really avoid any unknown dogs. So there's definitely room for dogs in this category to move up and down the spectrum. So dogs who are dog selective and really don't like to interact, in the first example I gave, with maybe excited adolescent dogs. If that dog is consistently asked to interact with excited adolescent dogs, they might kind of slide down the spectrum and become less selective and more aggressive and trying to actively make those dogs that they really don't want to interact with go away. They also could slide the other way down the spectrum and become more tolerant and maybe become dog social if they're consistently only having really positive interactions with other dogs. They might be more open to having more of those positive interactions in the future. It's really important that we, have an understanding of how this works, not in the interest of changing where a dog falls on this spectrum while they are in foster care, as that is not the goal, but rather protecting the place that they are on this spectrum moving forward. So we don't want a dog who is dog selective to be consistently exposed to other dogs or having, poor interactions with other dogs and kind of backslide towards becoming dog aggressive, or even a dog social dog who, might have a really great history of having just endless, very positive interactions. But if they're exposed repeatedly to a dog who maybe is dog selective and really doesn't want to interact with them, and then their interactions start to become negative with that other dog, they might slide out of the dog selective section into, or out of the dog social section into being more dog selective. The biggest thing to note here is that dog social dogs, we tend to think that these are all dogs, like dogs just love other dogs. And the reason that kind of tracks in our brain is that for the most part, those are the dogs that we see. The dogs that we see out and about are dog social because they can, go anywhere and do anything regardless of what other dogs might be around. But that is not accurate. So the vast majority of dogs are in the dog selective category, and most likely a lot of dogs going out into foster are dog selective.
Once your foster dog is ready to go outside of the environment that you have initially created for them, so their initial bubble, you have to be very proactive in advocating for your foster dog when you cannot directly manage the environment itself. So as the foster caregiver and the dog handler, you need to make sure that you're speaking up to avoid your dog from having a negative interaction with another person, place, or animal. So this means that when you're out for a walk, you need to be able to say, I need to move to the other side of the street, or asking somebody to kindly step aside if you are not able to do so, or stepping aside yourself as well. All of our foster dogs are not allowed to meet another dog that we have not approved of. So thinking of animals in your home, we will give you approval on, of course, and then animals that are friends or family members are not allowed to meet your foster dog unless we have given you approval and walked you through the steps on how to be doing that. We may ask you that you don't introduce your foster dog to any new people. At least initially, this should not be something that is happening, but as they have settled into your home, it may be something that your foster dog is ready for, but you want to make sure you're checking in with us first prior to doing these things so that we're not moving too quickly for your foster dog. As I had said, as a foster caregiver, as well as a dog handler, we need to make sure we're not putting our dog in places where they're likely to have a negative experience. So for this reason, we do ask all of our foster dogs do not go to dog parks or other places where a dog may frequently be found off leash. So thinking of walking or hiking trails or paths, sports fields, playgrounds, any area that another dog owner may bring their dog to let them off leash to run around is not a place that we want our foster dogs going to. And that is because we cannot directly manage what that other dog that is off leash is going to do, whether they're going to approach your foster dog or not. We also don't want our foster dogs meeting other dogs on leash. So this means when you are out walking your dog on the street, if you are coming across another person walking their dog, we want to make sure that we're moving to the other side of the road or off to a little path or spot where we can let the dog hang out and sniff around while that person passes. Or if that is not possible to avoid another dog, turning around and heading the other way. Again, making sure that we are not allowing our dog to interact with a dog that we do not know, because we don't want to let them have a negative experience. And we never know how another dog is going to react to our foster dog. And this all kind of goes back to dog sociability and trying to avoid shifting our dog on that sociability scale from being either dog selective or dog social, all the way down to the point where they're maybe now being avoidant of other animals or really, really struggling when meeting other animals as well. So that's something that we don't want to see happen to our foster dogs. Now, if your foster dog is social and does struggle when they're on leash and sees another dog, let your foster coordinator know, and we can get in touch and discuss what we can do to help that dog along as well, because we don't want them not interacting with other dogs and continuing to struggle and have some reactivity on leash to develop other behavioral issues. So certainly let us know if you're having a challenge there. We don't want those things to continue. And in addition to all of these things, If there are other dogs in your home, which we're going to discuss shortly, or if there are people within your social circle that have dogs that you want to introduce your foster dog to, you do need approval from us, either your foster team or a behavior member, to approve that meet, as well as giving you instructions on how that meet should look. Are other animals in the home, there are additional pieces of management you may need to introduce depending on what your home setup looks like. We are always happy to discuss with you as foster coordinators what your setup is currently, or what you were hoping to use for your setup for your foster dog, and if that is going to work for this individual dog, and keeping them separate from your resident animals. Also keeping in mind that depending on what the situation and why the reasoning is of why this dog is going to be placed into a foster home, they may never be allowed to interact with your resident animal. So going back and making sure that we have established that limit and making sure that you are able to manage this dog in your home, keeping them completely separate for the duration of the fostering period and not for just a short period of time as well. There are a number of reasons why we ask that these animals are kept separate from resident animals. One of the huge ones is contagious disease, which we discuss in orientation. So these dogs could be harboring something that we are not aware of, or maybe they already are harboring something and you have been made aware of that. So keeping them separate is a really crucial piece of managing them in the home and making sure that your resident animal stays safe. But these dogs also could have just undergone medical treatment or a surgery that is requiring exercise restriction, and allowing them to interact with another animal that they might want to play with is not a good way to make sure that they're resting like they should be. But also thinking of the stress and that foster animal has been through, and all the transitions that they have added in. But also thinking of your resident animal and how they respond to stress and something new in their environment is really important as well. Many of us staff members have or do foster frequently, and sometimes our animals in our homes have a really wonderful time interacting with a foster dog, but then there are other times where they don't. Thinking of taking home a rambunctious puppy to your dog that maybe is a couch potato, they may not respond correctly to that. But also personalities sometimes just don't match up. So even if you have expectations to allow them to be introduced at some point during your fostering period, you might not ever be able to, just because of their personalities and just how well these animals settle together in the home. And we also want to make sure that when we are ready to introduce these animals, they're having a very slow and controlled introduction. We want to make sure that your animal in your home has a successful fostering experience this time, as well as has the opportunity to have a successful experience in future fostering opportunities. And also kind of looking at your dog day to day. One day, your resident dog might get along with your foster dog really well, and the next day they might decide they don't want to. Just like us, our mood can kind of change from day to day. So always making sure that we're looking at the dogs that are directly in front of us and not basing their interactions on previous days or previous experiences.
Next, we're going to talk about socialization. It is a really hot button word. We hear it thrown around in the dog training and dog behavior kind of field all over the place. And even outside of the field, it's kind of a word that you hear at your vet's office and at the groomer and at the pet store. And, your uncle's cousin's best buddy is going to tell you all about dog socialization. What we want to do is have kind of a working definition of what we mean when we think about socialization. So we're going to talk about what it is, and then we're going to talk about what it isn't. So what dog socialization is careful, intentional introductions to people, places, and things. That those careful and intentional introductions are happening at really low levels so that the dog has minimally a neutral experience, or at best a positive experience, and that we're always pairing those intentional introductions with something really good. So earlier in previous modules, when we did talk about really getting to know your dog and their likes and their dislikes, we talked about how to tell them when they get it right and how to identify what is reinforcing to a dog. That's what we would be pairing with these very intentional and careful introductions, the things that we know that this individual dog really likes. Things that socialization is not. It is not exposure to something new at distances that are really close and for very long periods of time, and doing those things regardless of what the dog's response is. It's not passive, it's not unstructured, and it's not happening in a way where the dog doesn't have an option to get away, or you don't have a way to abort that situation if you need to. And it's definitely not an assumption that with enough exposure that the dog will just kind of figure it out on their own, outgrow it, or eventually just get used to something that they were otherwise afraid of, worried about, and trying to either get away from or make go away from them. So exposure is not socialization, certainly not exposure on its own. This image lives in our foster library, so you can access this at any time. It's a really nice way to kind of break down how you might socialize a dog to things in their everyday life that we want them to have really good experiences with. So you can see with new people, we're allowing that dog to approach at their own pace. The person that they're approaching is not trying to convince them to approach by luring them with food or a toy. They're not doing anything other than remaining neutral and allowing that dog to make his own decisions. And then when he does make that decision, really good things happen. Maybe he gets treats from his handler. Maybe he gets praise from his handler. But none of those things are being used to coerce or convince that dog to approach the new person that they might be a little bit worried about. Going back to the body language that we discussed in module 1, you can see that that dog, that first dog on the top left image, is exhibiting a lot of worried body language. His head is low. He's whale-eyed. You can see the whites of his eyes. He has his, paw lifted up in a little paw lift, and he has his weight shifted in a way where he's trying to keep his feet as far away from the new maybe worrisome person, and is just kind of sniffing the air towards him. So we can see that that dog is worried. And so it's really important that in those situations, we're not trying to force the dog into a situation that they're otherwise uncomfortable with. And that when they do make those choices, that good things are happening and that those good things are coming from their handler or their foster or caregiver, and not from the new, scary, worrisome thing. We also want to take into consideration that, a lot of puppies are going out to foster as well. And so we want to make sure that we are taking the opportunity to help them have those really positive experiences, but we're doing it in a really gently, thoughtfully, positively structured way. The other animal section we're going to skip in this presentation because it is not something we are going to ask you to do in foster. So like we just talked about with the dog sociability spectrum, we're not looking for dogs to change their responses to other dogs in foster. So we're going to skip that section, but we will talk through new things in dog's environment. And this is very likely to come up in a lot of foster situations because many of the dogs that are going out to foster will likely have come in through some form of transportation from another sending location, from another shelter, either out of state or maybe from, somebody locally, but that dog might not have lived in a home before. And so when we're bringing a dog into a new environment, there's going to be different sounds and textures and experiences in that home that they may not have ever had before. So we're taking all the information that we've gathered about that dog's preferences, likes, dislikes, and all those things that we've learned by observing their body language. And then we're using that to gauge their response to these new experiences within our home. And then we're working to pair those intentional exposures to those new things in our environment like maybe linoleum flooring, tile flooring that might be slippery for a dog. And that's new, and we can see through their body language that they're worried about it. We're not going to ask them to do it. We're not going to lure them onto the slippery floor with a treat. We're not going to pick them up and put them on it. But we are going to observe anytime that they seem to explore that space. Maybe we know that they really love milk bones. Every time they go over and check that spot out, you go ahead and kind of neutrally just pass them a treat. Good job checking that out. That thing that you just checked out, not so bad. It makes milk bones happen, is kind of the message we're looking to send. And we can talk a lot more about any of these topics in more depth as it relates to specific dogs and the information we might already have about them before we send them out to a foster setting. So keep all of this in mind when talking to your foster coordinator or the behavior coordinator or behavior manager at your location, so we can help guide you and inform how you might want to take best approaches with your new foster dog. Now we're going to talk just a bit about identifying challenges. We have talked through how we are using the decompression period of time to really gain a deep understanding of who our foster dog is and how they communicate. And we're doing that while we're managing their environment to help them make right choices. And, at that point, we'll be able to really identify what their baseline is. And so when we're thinking about challenges or things that are kind of outside of what we know to be normal for this dog, we're using all that information to look for outliers. So if we know how this dog behaves as kind of a baseline and what their day-to-day looks like, we can say anything outside of that kind of falls into the realm of a challenge or a concern. And concerns don't really have to be anything that's a super significant behavior, but anything that is new or different for that dog or happening kind of out of context is something that we should know about as part of that dog's care team. So your foster and behavior coordinators should be made aware of anything that, the dog really seems to be struggling with, even if it's just a little bit. The more we know about their specific dislikes and likes and what they're comfortable with and the things they're doing really well with, but maybe also the things that they need a little bit more support for, all of that allows us to make better matches for them with the right adopter and provide support while they're in foster, but also provide additional support for their future placements. So the biggest things we need to be able to do are identify when the dog needs help. The next step is, once we've identified that there's a concern, consulting with the foster team before starting any intervention. We want to make sure that we're coming at it as a united front, that we're all on the same page, and that we're moving forward with a plan that makes sense to everybody and will work for everybody. And that plan of action might involve the behavior teams as well. So we'll really move into step 3 together as a team to help support that individual dog in that foster placement. We've talked about observing dogs' body language, but what we're really looking for when we're trying to identify what a challenge might be is that their behavior might mean, you might understand it to mean one thing, but then it's happening out of context. So if you notice that your dog is hesitant or resistant to interact with a person, but we know that they are historically really comfortable, really affiliative, really solicitous with other people, and then we're seeing this hesitancy seemingly out of context, that would be a way to identify that by observing their body language, we're seeing that they're uncomfortable, and that could be concerning. Other things that we might notice would be excessive or repetitive behaviors. So constant barking, pacing, drooling, panting. We know, dogs might drool when they're hungry, but if we notice that they're just kind of walking around the house constantly drooling, that could be, that's something that's happening out of context. So that could be a clue that something is wrong or that that dog needs some additional support. Panting excessively when it's not hot out or they haven't just exercised a lot is another really key way to tell that, that panting can be a totally normal behavior for a dog, but it is happening out of context, like they haven't exercised or the temperature is comfortable. Behaviors that hurt people or other animals is a really good clue that something's going on that needs addressing. So even if it's during play and we feel like, oh, well, he didn't mean to hurt me. If a dog is hurting a person in any way, even seemingly by accident, it's important that we have that information so that we can help them learn different ways to play where everybody stays safe and comfortable. So that is information that should be reported to your foster coordinator immediately. Discomfort or fear, especially surrounding handling or approaching or interacting with a person when they have something like a food item or a chew or a toy. And we did talk a lot about body language, but ways that we would identify that dog is experiencing discomfort or fear, we might notice, we're looking at, as discussed in body language in module 1, we're looking at their face, their ears, eyes, mouth. We're looking at their overall body posture, and we're looking at their tail. So if we see a dog who's uncomfortable with handling, surrounding, putting on their harness, for example, we might see that dog lean away from us, tuck their tail, pin their ears, lean their face away from us, whale eye towards us. Those would all be cues in their body language that they're uncomfortable. And those would all be things where you would want to reach out to your foster coordinator right away and let them know what you're seeing. And I'll end that slide by saying, if there's anything that you're not sure about, if you're not sure if it's worth reaching out to us, I can assure you it always is. We would so much rather have more information than less information. And more communication is never a bother. It is invited and encouraged. We want to know how things are going every step of the way so we can make sure we're working together to support the dog that's in care.
Keeping us updated and reporting concerns. So for each foster, we do require that you're filling out our foster report card, which was discussed in orientation, every 14 days. So typically what the process kind of looks like is a day or two after you get this animal home, we're going to do a check-in via phone call or email to make sure everything is going well, making sure you don't have any concerns or questions at that point in time. If everything is going well, we'll ask you to start filling out the report card that following Monday, and then every 2 weeks after that point. Now, if you come across a concern sometime in between when that foster report card has been filled out, don't wait to let us know. You should be filling out the foster concerns form, which can be found on our website and on our Trello board immediately after that concern has been noted. Whether it's a medical or behavioral concern, we need to know about it. After that form has been filled out, the foster coordinators are notified, and then we will reach out, or we'll have a member of the behavior team reach out if it's something more significant. For any animal that is unexpectedly difficult or dangerous to handle, we ask that you use our emergency protocols. Essentially, get yourself to a safe space and call your foster coordinator or the foster program manager, and we will come out and take that dog back into the shelters. Areas to work on. So these are some kind of final closing thoughts for the foster care program training. So thinking that most of our foster dogs are coming into or going into foster care with minimal areas to work on. For some final closing thoughts for our foster care areas to work on. For final closing thoughts, these are the last little pieces that we wanted you to be thinking of when you're taking a foster dog home. Thinking that most of our foster dogs will go into your home having minimal experience with basic skills. Working on these skills is important for foster care, but we are not expecting them to return to our shelters knowing all of their basic commands and being fully housebroken. But it does give them an advantage when they're placed into an adoptive home if they have experience with these skills. Any exposure to these skills is greatly beneficial for your foster dog and their new adopter. Of course, kind of keeping in mind that the reason why your foster dog is placed into foster care could limit your ability to work on these skills. So also keeping that in mind, it is not a failure if your foster dog comes back without having any of these skills. Continue to evaluate your ability to commit to this animal in your home. Things change. Certainly kind of keeping in mind that your life experiences and your, oh goodness, why can't I talk today? Continuously evaluate your ability to commit to this fostering experience. Keeping in mind that things change from day to day. Your life experience and the position you were in when you first took this foster animal home might be different. And as well as the needs of that animal could change once they get into your home. They could always change for the better, and they could end up being a little bit easier, but they could also be a little bit more difficult than expected. So as things develop, keep asking yourself those questions on whether you're able to continue to commit to care for this animal in your home. And like I said at the very beginning in the first module, if you are needing to return your foster animal, it is not a failure. We understand. We don't want you to be overwhelmed and have a negative experience and potentially lead your family, your resident animals, and your foster animal to have a negative experience either. Kind of those expectations, meeting them where they are, making sure that we're going in, not expecting them to know certain things prior to taking them into our homes. And that this dog may have never lived in a home, or at least currently hasn't lived in a home for a certain amount of time. So it may take them some time just to adjust to that environment alone. So adding on expectations of them being housebroken and learning certain skills in that period of time, it might be unrealistic for that specific dog. Always meet that dog exactly where they are. And if you have questions or concerns, always reach out to your foster coordinator. We are here to support you. We want to make sure that you are having a good experience so that your foster dog is having a good experience and you continue to foster for us. On behalf of the entire team of the MSPCA, we thank you so much for applying for fostering and going through these trainings. We understand that fostering is hard. A lot of us foster ourselves. It is fun and meaningful and very rewarding work, regardless of how fun it is. And it is very life-saving for these animals. We appreciate you being part of our mission and an invaluable part of your foster dog's journey. As you can see, all of these pictures are dogs that were in foster care at some point in time and are now living in homes because of foster caregivers just like yourself.